Welcome back to the shop. I'm Kirk Anderson. Now this week's project goes hand in hand with last week's project, which was a birdhouse. So this week, it's a bird feeder. Now, a bird feeder can be as simple as just a box that you put bird seed in, or it can be a little bit more elaborate like the one I'm going to build. Now this design has been with me for years, as when I was a kid, my father built one that was pretty similar to this. Just like the birdhouse, the bird feeder is going to be made out of cedar. And the cedar boards that I have are a little bit too wide to joint on my 6-inch jointer. So the first thing I'm going to do is build a sled to flatten one side on the planer. If you would, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. So, without any further ado, let's get into the build.
I'll be making the sled for the planer at a 3/4 inch MDF. My planer is a 13-inch planer, so I cut this down to about 12 3/4 inch. Then I cut about a 3-inch piece off to make a cleat. And I'll be attaching the cleat to the base of the sled with screws and glue. Whenever you're making a sled to go into the planer, and if you're using screws, you need to make sure that you really countersink them so the screws won't come in contact with the blades. Once the sled was complete, I put the board on there to check and see how wobbly it was. And this piece was a bit wobbly. You don't want any wobble as it's going through the planer, so I took a piece of a shim to put underneath the board. And that took care of the wobble. Then I used some hot glue to secure the piece to the shim and also to the sled. And then it was time to send it through the planer. Now once the board was flat, it was just a matter of getting it off the sled. I just used a putty knife to break the grip of the hot glue. Then just peel the board off, and then scrape the hot glue off for the next board to go through. And once all the boards were flat on one side, then it was just a matter of setting them through the planer to get the other side flat and parallel. Then it was over to the table saw to cut the boards down to the lengths that I wanted. I don't know if you could tell, but there was a bit of snipe on the boards from going through the planer. And I always account for that snipe when I'm measuring out the boards. Now the side pieces will have an angle cut. And these cuts are real easy to do with the Incra 5000. And once the sides are cut, then it's time to cut the angles for what will be the roof. And one side piece is complete. Now it's time to cut another one. Now once the side pieces were cut, I needed to put a groove in them because I'm going to put a piece of plexiglass in there. And then I'll have a rail going between the two side pieces that will help hold the plexiglass. So I cut those on the table saw, and then those also need a groove in there for the plexiglass. Now I will be assembling this with glue and screws, and I'll be using pocket hole screws. But I want to cover up the screws, so I'm drilling out a recess with a Forstner bit that will be plugged. And then using a regular bit, I drill all the way through. When I'm gluing end grain, I'll put a small amount of glue on there and let it sit for a minute, and then I'll put more glue on. And if you watch a lot of my builds, I don't measure out that much. I'll use spacers, and here I'm using a spacer to determine where to place the side piece. Even though pocket hole screws are self-drilling, since I'm screwing into the end grain, I always pre-drill. And same thing for the rails. A little bit of glue, let it sit, and then put more glue on there. That's to let the glue get absorbed into the end grain a little bit, and then before the glue sets up, you put more glue on it. Now with these rails, especially because they're so narrow and it's the end grain, definitely have to pre-drill. Otherwise they may split. And then when I drive the screws in, I drive them in very slowly. Now in installing the plexiglass, I am putting a couple of drops of CA glue in there to help hold it. And then the plexiglass, with a little bit of help, just pops right on in. And then put the top rail on in the same fashion that the bottom rail was installed. Pre-drill and then slowly drive in the screw. As I said earlier, I'm going to plug the screw holes, and those are made on the drill press with a plug cutter in some scrap wood. And once they're cut, you just pop them out with a screwdriver. And put a good amount of glue in the holes. And then slide the plug in. And then give a little bit of a tap with a mallet. And then once the glue is dry, cut them flush with a flush trim saw. And then give it a good sanding so it's nice and smooth. Now for the roof, I cut the bevels on the table saw. Now it's time to put the two pieces together. And using some painter's tape, I make a hinge. Then apply the glue. And then using more painter's tape, bring the pieces together and then secure them with the painter's tape. Now for the roof, I did put a little handle on the top, and then I put some blocks underneath, that's so the roof won't slide off. And the roof fits nice and snug. Now I did put a little bit of a ledge around the base, that's so the birdseed won't just fall off. And since that basically creates a dish, I also had to drill some holes in there for drainage for when it rains. Well, there she is, filled with birdseed, ready to go feed the birdies. Well, I hope you enjoyed this build, and please give the video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And as always, all you woodworkers out there, just get out there and cut some wood.